everyone! In this video I'll explain how I draw perspective. I've briefly talked about it in my previous background tutorials, but I wanted to make a video dedicated to it. I'm going to go a bit deeper into different types of compositions and multiple point perspective. I am using Clip Studio Paint, which has a perspective ruler, but my methods can be used in any art program with straight line tools. Okay, so to create perspective, I draw a grid which will create depth through lines. The first thing I do is draw one vanishing point. This is the place where lines come together. The placement of this point impacts the composition and dynamic of the scene, so it's very situational. In general, when my canvas is vertical or square, I would put it somewhere in the middle to get a more symmetrical composition, which makes the scene look more balanced. But when the image is horizontal, I prefer it to be at around 3/4 of the length. This creates a more dynamic composition than a centered shot. Of course, in certain situations, a symmetrical wide shot is the desired effect, for example when drawing specific backgrounds. We also have to decide whether this point will be higher or lower. This will determine if the scene is viewed from above or below. Once I have decided the placement of the vanishing point, I will draw a straight line perpendicular to the canvas going through it. This will be the horizon line. Next, I create more straight lines going from the vanishing point to the edges of the canvas. And this is our first perspective point done. To be able to use this, let's imagine the three-dimensional space as a geometrical system, where the x-axis is the width, y is the height, and the z is the depth. Our vanishing point is situated on the horizon line, but isn't horizontal on the canvas, so what we have drawn is the z-axis. To draw the remaining axis, we have to decide how many points we want the perspective to have. For one-point perspective, the x-axis will be parallel to the horizon, and the y-axis will be perpendicular. I rarely use this kind of perspective because it looks less realistic and dynamic. In general, 2 and 3-point perspectives are reliable when it comes to creating realistic scenes. To make a 2-point perspective, I will just place another vanishing point on the horizon line, adding dimension to the x-axis. To make the scene even more dynamic, we add a third point for the y-axis. If we're looking at the scene from below, the point will be above the horizon line. Unless you're drawing a very wide shot, these points will usually be outside of the canvas. This is why I'm using the perspective ruler in CSP. If you don't have a tool like that, I recommend first drawing the full perspective grid, then cropping it or zooming to the shot you want. Now that we have our grid, we can actually start drawing. I recommend drawing basic shapes first, just following the lines of the grid. This drawing features buildings which are really simple to draw in perspective. But to tackle the characters, I try to imagine body parts as geometrical shapes first. I actually don't do a lot of foreshortening, just drawing everything in the right angle seems to do the trick. Unless you're drawing some crazy angles in perspective, I think just focusing on having the right proportions is fine. So the only thing I'm doing is creating upwards curves on the character since we're looking at it from below. I also made the second character smaller to make it look like she's further away. Moving on to the background. Like I mentioned before, I'm just following the lines of the grid. When I'm drawing buildings with multiple levels of windows or balconies, I tend to just draw one and then copy it and adjust it to match the grid. Another thing to keep in mind is changing the spacing between them, making things look bigger or smaller. The sections close to the vanishing point on the horizon line are the most tricky to draw, because everything is small and bundled up. Honestly, I recommend putting a character or a big object there to not have to draw as much. It also makes a nice focal point where the lines converge and bring attention there. And that's pretty much all the basics to drawing perspective. I hope this was helpful and feel free to ask any questions in the comments. There's a lot I could still talk about, but I tried to give you some simple tools to get you started. Thank you for watching and have fun drawing. Bye bye!